Earlier this past week, there has been a very interesting comment from Selangor FC CEO Dr. Johan Kamal Hamidon. And in those remarks that he spoke to the Malaysian media, he was suggesting an urgent meetup of all the clubs to discuss about the future of the Malaysian Football League, or in the more immediate context, the Malaysian Super League. And while the issues that have been plaguing the Malaysian Super League, such as late salary payments or the struggle to find sponsors, the never ending worries on whether the club will still be able to hobble on from season after season, what is pretty clear is in Dr. Hamidon's Johan Kamal's point, as well as those who agree with him, is that Malaysian club football is now very reaching a very important crossroads, especially with the various disparities that has been happening in the game, and also the rather dysfunctional Malaysian club football ecosystem that it has found itself in for at least the last 5 years. This is not just merely about historic clubs such as Pahang and Perak in after the last season withdrawing and self-demoting to the second tier Liga Pro to play, and joining them were also Kedah, but also the immense gap between the reigning league champions for 12 successive seasons, which I include this season, Johor Darul Takzim and the rest, the struggles of Selangor FC to play catch up for the longest time ever in their club history against the new long-standing kingpins of Malaysian football, JDT. And the list goes on and on. And in the crux of it is this league football ecosystem that has been making clubs worried at different levels. And while there has been support for Johan Kamal Hamidon's comments from particularly Penang, you can say Terengganu and Negeri Sembilan, there were also there was also one curious voice that appeared to be leading to neither here nor there, and one particular voice that opposed this whole thing. And when we look instead of beyond the comments, what we are seeing is in Liga Super Malaysia, there are various factors at play. And because of these factors at play, it has been very challenging for the Malaysia club football ecosystem to find themselves to be more competitive. And this was despite the Malaysian Football League, which governs the Liga Super Malaysia and the lower tier leagues, attempting to increase the level of competitiveness by having more foreigners or an increased foreign import quota, and also trying to attempt in the ever revolving landscape of trying to attempt to make clubs fully professional and privatized, an area that has been viewed as a major red flag in the AFC FIFA review of FAM and its relevant stakeholders. Now, and beyond that, what gives? Because the reasons behind Dr. Johan Kamal's comments on getting all the stakeholders to urgently meet to resolve the situation is a noteworthy one. For, despite its decline status, Selangor remains an influential voice in the wider Malaysian club circuit, second only to JDT. So its relevance is still there, where its former rivals in Pahang, Perak, and Kedah have totally set out of the top flight for the first time, especially from Perak, as more than 2 decades. They're sitting out of this current Malaysian Super League season because they cannot afford to. Their finances do not allow them to compete any longer, salary payments and all that. And let us go back a little bit to the history behind it, because without understanding the context of football finance and Malaysian club football, it is very hard to eschew what is happening in Malaysian club football today. When semi professional football was actually launched in 1989, Dunhill became the biggest sponsor. And in fact, it's ironic that it's because of such generosity from the sponsor. Among the products it promotes include tobacco products, that Malaysian football had such a flush of cash in the 1990s until the Malaysian government introduced legislation that banned tobacco advertising. That will happen in the mid 2000s. But for more than a decade, Malaysian club football enjoyed unprecedented financial windfall from Dunhill. Whether it was the state teams or Brunei, they all had enjoyed this particular windfall, in which clubs were able to sign decent quality imports and were able to pay the players of the day good salaries for them to finance a full-time career on the pitch. And subsequently, with the enforced exit of Dunhill as the main sponsor, this is where things have become messy and unstuck ever since. Whether it was Telecom Malaysia or subsequently other sponsors have come in to try to, you can say, to keep the league going, it is less simple because the clubs who were in the semi-pro journey were so fixated on the Dunhill income that even in the lowest points in the late 1990s of Malaysian football in the doldrums, that support kept going. The clubs continued to survive. They could still pay the players those big salaries. And crucially for the state teams, many of them were backed by state governments as well, their respective state governments. Selangor, then with the mandate of having their Menteri Besar to also be the state FA president. I think similar arrangements were made in other states as well. So that included political patronage or royal patronage with the state FA itself. Those who could afford it would be running away, whether it was your Selangor or Pahang of the day. Yes, they were capable of doing that. But once the money ran out, and once that question of professionalism came in from the critics, especially the media, especially after a few more negatives in the Malaysian football landscape, clubs begin to struggle to find themselves to learn the ABCs of how to run a professional football club. And even with the advent of the privatization of the Malaysian clubs, here is another problem. It's only for many of them privatization in name only. So as a result, because of, I think, several clubs, although the linkage between the political patronage and the club affiliation is a lot looser, but does it mean that things have gotten better financially? Tada. Even Selangor are now living within their means despite having the second highest budget. And this second highest budget pales in comparison to what JDT is spending. And obviously, quite a number of people will have all kinds of accusations on JDT. But a lot of people do not understand something else as well. It's a different. There are a few different dynamics at play. The one that I've been talking about so far until now is about money. Without the money, how do clubs operate? Then you got the budget. Selangor pales in contrast today compared to the past. This is where a lot of clubs do not realize it, a lot of fans may not realize it, as much as fans outside of Johor or those who are not supporters of JDT, they may not have realized something. With the exception of Selangor, quite a number of Super League clubs do actually rely on JDT to keep themselves afloat. Whether it was through loan signings to bolster the club, where JDT loaned out a number of first team players to various Malaysian clubs, notably with Penang, with Kuala Lumpur City, with to an extent Kuching City, also Sabah, as what the region of Johor Tuku Ismail Sultan Ibrahim had said in last year's press conference. He did point out something that was missed in the furor of the seven foreigners fake documentation scandal. He said this that was pretty prescient. Without JDT supplying those players on loan, without JDT even on occasion buying a few players, as what they did in mid-season by buying one Sabah player into their first team just to ensure that Sabah survives, there will be the Malaysian football ecosystem would have been teruk, kaput. That's how bad it is without JDT propping up the thing. And this is not just about JDT running away with how many successive Liga Super Malaysia championships. This is also the same JDT that is also keeping the ecosystem afloat as they realize how it is. Because they know that as wide the gap of competitiveness is, but without the other teams playing in the Liga Super, how are JDT supposed to play domestic games, even if it's just to clock minutes or to get some match sharpness ahead of the biggest Southeast Asian and Asian club assignments? This is JDT's point of view. For other clubs, having JDT to send those players on loan to them, where many of them eventually became starting players, is a godsend as well, because it allows the teams to remain competitive, especially in the fight for second place. But this ecosystem cannot, which has been in place for at least the last 5 seasons, cannot be lasting this forever. Because if one day JDT decides to cut back on their own and they decide not to loan any more players, then a few other Malaysian Super League clubs will be finished. And this could effectively reduce the Malaysian Super League from the current 13 teams, which includes DPMM, to possibly 7 overnight, which will still include DPMM, Selangor, and a few others. But I think it's also in the context from a different angle that both JDT and Selangor, from different angles, realize the Sama problem. Malaysian club football is in danger. Is in danger of not just overreaching, but also breaking down beyond repair. And already back in the 2000s, when they first introduced the Liga Perdana, there were only 8 top flight teams, but there were 16 second division teams. And when you have only 8 clubs in the top flight, clubs will be forced to play one another 3 rounds just to fit the minimum number of games needed for a season, for league. Then you have the cup games as well. How is the Malaysian Cup going to be organized? How many second tier teams will be allowed to take part? Is it still going to be the knockout format or group back to the group stage? Or worse, how about the FA Cup? What about the other domestic competitions? I mean, even if we put JDT aside, Selangor is worried about its own future. So do all the other clubs in the Malaysian Super League, including a number of whom are relying on JDT for survival. Without JDT, I think I already said probably six clubs could be gone. And one of them could well be Kuala Lumpur City because when you got I think the issues that clubs faces, they can do their marketing people can do historical campaigns, they can do excellent one-off campaigns, but there's no sustainability. There's no significant financial windfall those those merchandise sales. And also, when ticket sales are concerned, not every game is going to attract 10,000 fans. Even JDT have been struggling to attract good attendances for their domestic games because many people in Johor only want to see Johor play in the AFC Champions League Elite, the highest level of Asian club competition. They know that maybe against Selangor there'll be some attendance, maybe against KL, maybe, but attendances even for GDT has not been great too. So everybody is suffering. And here lies the context in the crossroads. Is it a case of keeping everyone on some kind of taking major decisions that could harm the league in the short term, but at least keep the clubs going for quite a while, even with, you can say, reduced ability to compete overseas? Or, or for Selangor, for Johor, and I think this is where Datu Zainal Abidin comes in. If you want to be champions, if you want to build a good level, it's not just about cutting costs at certain levels and potentially reducing it to semi-pro level. It's about working harder to ensure that the foundations of the game, from the grassroots to the ecosystem, the whole Malaysian football ecosystem, from the state level or from the district level, state level, all the way to the national level, is healthy, then there has to be a greater overview on this regard. It's true that there's always a chicken and egg situation. You need money to have competitive teams, but sometimes you do need homegrown players with star brandings, and there are not that many, to keep the visibility of the Malaysian League alive to the local viewers. And that goes beyond the diehard fans, the core supporters, or those who follow Malaysian League football, club football religiously. It's not, it's beyond that. And so what gives? Is it how are they going to do it? Because should there ever be a conversation among all the MSL clubs to talk about the future of the league, the options on the table are not going to look pretty. But you do not want a situation where you can say Kevin Ramalingam, the CEO, I mean, who who is also from JDT, to come in and say that those clubs are suddenly talking about solutions when their own club structure is nowhere near the standard involved. And he doesn't want the prospect of the guys coming just to have kopi and karipap and talk nothing. Tak ada. It doesn't work this way. So it's quite clear that all can see that there's a problem. But which way forward will it be? Will it be keeping things as they are for the next few years with a significant amount of burden on JDT, not just on them winning title, but also supplying players to keep the league alive? Or is it more about clubs trying to find ideas and solutions on whether they want to keep themselves financially prudent but at the expense of a competitive league? Or have a relook at the whole ecosystem beyond the Liga Super Malaysia and see what more can they do to ensure to, you can say, we talk about building having more homegrown players so that we do not need the Malaysian football doesn't need to be in the embarrassing scenario like what they had suffered in the falsification of documents of the grandparents of the now seven ineligible players. This is not an easy pathway. There's no easy solution. Clubs operate in very different methods, but at times it's also pretty evident that privatization alone will lead all the clubs to nowhere. Without some kind of state backing, without some kind of, you can say, patronage involved. But how are the clubs going to find solutions so that they, at least many, will still continue to move forward in the Malaysian League football to at least to have every team more that's more than capable of fielding, say, the required four local born players in the starting 11 who are there on merit and not on tokenism? How to develop a national team that is more than competitive enough to reduce the reliance on naturalization, and how to get the league functioning to the extent that Astro will still be willing to commit money in the hope that it is profitable, in the hope that they can distribute the viewing money to the clubs, and also where attendances across the board improves because they're convinced that the quality is real, the play is real, and the clubs know how to take care of themselves instead of the regular headlines of salary defaults, um, salary defaults, no sponsorship, unsure about the future, EPF contributions, and so on and so forth. So, where this crosses is concerned, I do hope that all the relevant parties can come together and thrash out all the issues that each club is facing, from JDT all the way to Penang and PDRM, including Selangor, to see all the different angles in which where every club has faced what kind of significant difficulties. Those with state affiliation can still survive, but those that are privately owned or have begun from as a grassroots club that has managed to find its way to to the Liga Super Malaysia, how to stay there, how to remain relevant. I think that's where we hope, if there's such a meeting, that this particular crossroads will be answered, will be addressed.